Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what time of day you're going to be listening to this broadcast, the intentions of the heart. And today's lesson is going to be talking about when the promise finds you. And the foundation scripture is in Genesis 24, verse 14, as well as verses 43 to 47. And it's dealing when Isaac receives his bride. Let's begin with what Rebekah's name means. It means tying and binding up, implying that her beauty was so great that it could literally captivate or fascinate any man. She is introduced as a diligent, industrious, beautiful girl, which means that she didn't rely on her beauty and she was extremely hardworking. Many times pretty women have a tendency to think that that's all they need in order for a man to marry them. Women must be willing to bring something beyond their beauty to the table. Here's a sidebar. Can you raise a family? Can you manage your household? Can you run a business? Are you able to go from the bedroom to the boardroom? This would be considered a modern day Proverbs 31 woman. Rebekah was willing to serve Eliezer, Abraham's servant, without knowing, number one, without knowing who he was. Number two, without knowing what he was carrying. He was Abraham's proxy, which denoted his authority to pick a wife on behalf of Isaac. Why is that significant? Because it's critical in receiving a gift from a king. Kings are looking at the integrity. They're looking at the character of an individual before bestowing, before granting, before presenting or imparting their treasure. A king must know your true intentions prior to the distribution of wealth. They are looking to see if you want their possessions or do you seek their wisdom. Too often, we want the promise without the due diligence of any effort being made towards going through the process. Rebekah could have said within herself, drawing the water for the servant was one thing, but having the audacity to ask her to draw water for the servant's camel was something altogether different. Not to mention, he had 10 camels. And each camel had the capacity to drink several gallons of water at a time. Just know your beauty is never greater than the promise God has for your life. So stop thinking that what God will use that to bless you. That's a shallow misrepresentation of who God is. The question becomes, are you willing to serve before your promise ever arrives? Do you have an understanding as to the nature of being a servant? Can you identify the characteristics of a servant? Rebekah was willing to perform duties for someone else before her needs were ever met. She not only served him, but she stooped down to serve what mattered to him. Don't misconstrue that the point that back in that time, there was a tradition that camels signified wealth back then. Let this be a lesson to women. It takes preparation and it takes training to know the distinction between a checker move versus a chess move. A checker move seeks a position of authority, while a chess piece is seated in a position of authority. Before I elaborate further on the specificity of servants and kings, I will end this lesson with a brief story of my modern day example of facing a king and not knowing he was a king, nor had the understanding the authority that he held. So stay tuned.